The best ever. I'm the most brutal and vicious and most ruthless champion there's ever been. No one can stop me. I'm the best ever.
Maybach music.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Let's get ready to
One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome to the Walden Podcast, where we talk about entrepreneurship, the great outdoors, and more importantly, living a life with intent. My name is Marcus Keos. Some of you may know me as Totally Upland. Today, I've got Jeff Benda on from wildfishandgame.com. He's
Wild Game and Yep.
Wild Game and Fish.
Wildgameandfish.com. That's all right.
Oh, okay, good. I said Wild Fishing Game, didn't I?
That's all right.
Wildfish.com. He's a chef, and more importantly, he's creating recipes for wild game. I'm excited to take a dive in here with you. Glad to have you on the show, sir.
Yeah, no, glad to be here. I'm always excited to talk about wild game cooking. So
Yes, let's go. So you've been cooking for 25 years. You didn't start really as a hunter. You or your dad didn't bring you into hunting. When did you get in, really?
yeah, so I was an Air Force brat. So I was brought to North Dakota. I was born in North Carolina, and my dad was stationed up here, and so I grew up on the eastern side of North Dakota. But we never really went outside of the air base. I never really went outside of this eastern side between Grand Forks, North Dakota, Fargo, North Dakota, and never went and explored any of the rest of the state. I looked out the backyard and looked west, and it looked like a big cornfield. So that was it. And so as soon as I could, and I was old enough, I ran off after high school and ran off to go to Florida. Worked restaurants there, came back, and then wasn't excited to be back in North Dakota because I literally was living on an island off the coast of Fort Myers. And so I was like, that was stupid. Why did I come back to North Dakota? So I left again and went to Florida. But when I came back, I was going back and I wanted to go back to school to be a teacher. And so I went to this town, Valley City, where they had Valley City State University in North Dakota. It's about an hour west of Fargo. And there I was introduced to hunting. I had a group of guys who were willing to take me hunting. And you got to understand that I grew up wanting to go hunting. I grew up wanting to go fishing. I read every book out there about like My Side of the Mountain, Sign of the Beaver, Island of the Blue Dolphins, anything where a kid was left in the woods or in the outdoors and had to fend for themselves. That was my dream. And so, I just dreamed about these experiences when I was a kid, surviving out in the woods and hunting for food and fishing for food and foraging for food. But I never got to have that experience. And then I had a group of hunters, experienced hunters who said, hey, we'll take you. And so it was 21 years ago, and they took me on my first duck hunt. And then a couple weeks later, I went on my first pheasant hunt. And a few weeks after that, I went on my first deer hunt. And you have to understand that at this point in my life, I was just about to leave North Dakota again and move back to Florida for the last and final time. And after someone introduced me to hunting, when you read about Theodore Roosevelt's experience here in North Dakota and just how he fell in love with it, I fell in love with North Dakota because someone took me hunting, because I was out driving around back roads and just seeing more of the country, and so I just fell in love with it because of hunting. And so I announced that I was staying, and so since then I have not missed a duck opener. I've skipped weddings. I've made people mad, but I just love it. And now, fast forward, 21 years, and this is, basically I'm doing this for a living. I'm developing recipes for my website and other companies out there, and living my dream.
Let's go. So the good old waterfowl, Gordon Ramsay, when he brings his students up, he won't graduate them unless they learn how to cook a duck. From what I understand, duck breast is the pain in the butt to do in the cast iron. Like, is that the drill? You think duck tastes better, or how come upland's not number one?
I mean, everybody has a different perspective, so I'm not going to say anything like that. I mean, my first experience with duck was everything was breasted out. And that went for pheasants too, well, no, pheasants was a different situation. My first duck, I remember all we did was breast it out, cut it into strips. And it was basically kind of like a popper, but there was a piece of pickled jalapeno, like doused it with Tony's Creole seasoning, put a piece of pickled jalapeno in there and some onion, wrapped it, bacon around it, and we cooked it, and we absolutely loved it. And we would probably eat a couple dozen of those. Pheasant, my first experience with pheasant here in North Dakota was like a lot of people's, and it was put in a crock pot with a can of cream of mushroom soup. And I was like, well, there's that.
Yeah.
Deer, all of the deer was made into sausage or butter. All of the back straps were butterflied steaks. It was just, but you took it in and you had it processed, or at least into sausage. It was just a very different experience back then.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, you still have the jalapeno put in the middle of the dove, wrapped in bacon, and then the joke is you eat the bacon and the jalapeno, and you throw the dove away.
Yeah.
There needs to be innovation in this space. I truly believe there's a ton of different recipes that could be happening, and we really should be pushing the game and trying to make game taste better and be a more exquisite meal. I love what you're doing. What is your philosophy, and what prompted you to really start pushing the envelope on what you can do with wild game in the kitchen?
I think really I don't see it there's some phenomenal chefs out there that really, when you just mentioned the phrase pushing the envelope. I really think that if you look at my website, these are recipes that anybody and everybody can do. I think really my philosophy is just using more of the animal, right? I mean, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but our early goose season, we have an August season, and then we have an early in a September season. So we have weeks of being able to shoot Canada geese here in North Dakota, where before the regular waterfowl opener, and we can shoot 15 a day. We have the most liberal waterfowl regulations in the country when it comes to Canada geese. And so, are we going to shoot 15 a day? Not all the time, but I mean, we can really load up on that. And if you're just taking the breasts and making jerky out of them, and then leaving everything else out in the field, that's a lot of wasted meat. And so, really, my philosophy is just getting creative with what we have, but also just using recipes that we know. I mean, I've made a tikka masala out of goose legs and thighs. A French dip sandwich with goose legs and thighs. Or just using, like a Mexican pozole, a soup with the pheasant legs and thighs. There's all kinds of different things that you can do, but these are recipes that everybody knows, using seasonings that you can easily get. But I think we automatically put wild game into its own. This is how you have to cook it. This is all you're going to use. And we put ourselves in that box. And so really what I'm trying to teach people is, being able to use recipes that you might love all the time. That you might love making all the time, but using wild game in them instead.
Yeah, it's a protein is a protein, and you can use that protein in a lot of different recipes, really.
Right.
Let's talk about gamey. That word, it has a negative connotation. Where do you stand on it?
I don't mind if people use it, because they use it to me all the time. I mean, I do wild game cooking demonstrations all across the country, And, every single time somebody's hand goes up and asks, how can you get the gamey taste out of the meat? Um, and that description can really be described in different things. So you always have to kind of dive into that. Are they talking about antelope, um, or mule deer? Like, is it really taste? Is it got a sage taste, or exactly where are they going with that? Gamey taste. Um, you know, and it can also depend on.
Cool.
Yeah,
I think my mom, she'll be like, "Oh, is it gamey? It must be gamey." And I think she just heard that, and then
right.
anytime it's wild, she wants to
Yeah,
say,
yeah. I've served mule deer bottom round steak that I aged for a couple weeks. I tenderized it with a Jacquard meat tenderizer and grilled it with salt and pepper and olive oil and served it at a barbecue. And I had a guy arguing with me, swearing to me that I was trying to trick him because he was eating beef. The man was 80 years old and he was like, I've had deer steaks all my life and this is beef and you're not, and I'm like, so, or my mother-in-law will call it, she'll eat something that I prepare. She had aoudad. I did an event, a cooking class down in Texas, and somebody had gifted me some aoudad backstrap, and I served it to my mother-in-law and father-in-law, and she was like, "Wow, this tastes like real steak," and for her that meant beef,
yeah,
right? And she doesn't like lamb; she can't stand it. But she had aoudad that a lot of people just would never think in a million years
right.
that would taste good. And it really comes down to, you know, I, I never criticize anybody when they say it tastes gamey or how can you get that gamey taste. Um, I don't use that term, but I you know, I, y- I don't criticize anybody
I'm
for
sure
whatever
that
it is.
you probably encounter it. I think for even some hunters will say things are gamey. It's just a
Yeah.
common phrase. I'm sure that you encountered at times, and I was just curious to know where you land on it.
Yeah. Like my wife though would tell you, I had a bighorn sheep in my freezer. I got to go photograph one of the North Dakota bighorn sheep hunts. And the client, she didn't want any of the meat. So I got an entire bighorn sheep, um, 2 years ago. But my wife would tell you she'll eat anything and everything when it comes to wild game. She would not eat that bighorn sheep. You know, I aged it, tenderized it. There was just a smell, but it's this 9-year-old ram. Um, and it was just very different. And this is a woman who loves pronghorn antelope, who loves mule deer, and she will not touch that bighorn sheep. So
Interesting.
she might say it smells and tastes gamey. But
So let's talk about preparation. I
yeah,
mean, you're saying you aged it. Like, what can hunters do to amplify their game that they've harvested?
yeah, really the key is getting it cooled down right away. If we're talking big game or geese or any pheasants, whatever the case is really meat care is number one. Um, but say take a deer or an antelope, for instance, you really want to get that meat cooled down right away and not throw it in the back of the truck and drive around and for 8 hours from bar to bar and showing everybody. You really, that's really key is keeping it dry and getting it cooled down. So don't just throw it in some ice water. I've seen that done. Um, and then what I'll do is I don't have walk-in coolers. I butcher for people all the time, but I don't have big walk-in coolers. And really, so I might hang it in the garage if the weather and the temperature is a good temperature. But a lot of
Right.
times I have to use those big coolers, um, and I'll I'll open the drain. I'll put ice in the bottom of the cooler. Put like a uh, a big bag down, like a not a regular garbage bag because they'll spray those with pesticides, chemicals. But like a leaf bag, and then put the meat, like maybe put a rack or something, and then put the meat on top of that, and then have a little fan blowing, and just put it in my basement with the drain open, like over the laundry. And then I'll just let it sit in there and keep it cool, and have that in there I'll age it maybe a week or 2 weeks. I'll also, or I might pull it out and if I don't have space, I'll start with that maybe for a week, and then I'll cut it into, get it off the bone, and then I'll wet age it for another week before I freeze it. And really that just has just made a big difference on
Yeah.
the flavor.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about aged beef all the time.
Right.
How often are you encountering other hunters that are aging their meat? Probably not very often, I would assume.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things too, I'll deal with a lot of clients for classes. They'll go out and spend 15,000, 20,000 on an elk hunt, and then come home and want to throw the meat out because it's too tough. And a lot of times in that situation, we'll talk it through, and I'll ask them, when did you shoot it? And then when was it? And then they're like, okay, yeah, we showed up at this place and we shot this elk, and then they got it all frozen for us. Then we got on a plane or we got in the car. Well, if you're freezing your meat, if you're looking at the time frame and you're freezing that meat when it's in rigor, full rigor, if you're not waiting for it to go into rigor and then come out, that is going to be the toughest meat ever. They might have this beautiful backstrap from a bull elk, but if you froze that when it was in full rigor, it's gonna be tough. There's just, so you really want to take the time to make sure you take care of that meat, and giving it those even just a few extra days, just a couple extra days before you freeze it. That just makes a huge difference. I think that's a big mistake that people make.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So in game, if you prep your meat, is more tender. What about flavor?
Yeah, I mean those flavors can, over time aging, it's going to make a big difference, but really it can depend on what the diet was of the animal. Were they sitting eating corn? Like that aoudad that I shot or that I didn't shoot, but somebody that I had from Texas. It was on a high fence operation eating corn, right?
Yeah.
Off a feeder. Of
Yeah.
course it's going to taste like beef. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
people are like, oh yeah, it's stinky and it's not going to taste any good. It was a corn fed animal, right?
Yeah.
The flavors there are just very, very different than you might have in a different situation. It can also depend on, the stress of the animal. What was the situation at the time? Did you shoot it on deer opener after it had been chased and kicked out, of different spots by people walking like 4 or 5 different times? Or did you walk over a hill and it never knew you were there and you shot it, right? No stress at all. And it died instantly. So, yeah, flavors, there's just so many different not perspective. There's so many different things that go into what is going to be the tenderness of that animal and what's going to be the flavor. There's so many different situations that can impact it.
Yeah. So Jeff, let's talk about your come up. I mean, how do you become the wild game and fish cook?
So during COVID, all the restaurants are closing, catering events are being canceled, and so there was a whole bunch of chefs. I'm blanking on what that it was something for iPhone users. They were like audio chat rooms, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to remember what the app was. Right at the beginning, it was for iPhone users. Anyway, so there was all these chat rooms and people were going into them and talking. And one of them was Danielle the Diva Q. If you've ever seen, like, she sells Traegers on QVC. Okay. You'll see her sitting in the parking lot outside of the Super Bowl cooking on Traegers. And anyway, so she had this barbecue room. And so all these people were logging in and listening. So it was an audio thing that you would go on, and then you could join in on the conversation. She could call you up, and so there was a group of us that were in there, and she and I chatted a little bit outside of that on some Zoom calls. And then one morning, it was an early morning show. It was on, like, I think Central Time. It was like 6 to 8 or like 6 to 8 a.m. or something like that. Anyway, so one day somebody said something, asked about venison on the Traeger, smoking it. And she said, hang on, let's ask our wild game expert, and introduced me.
Called on you. Yeah, let's go. Let's go.
And then it was just funny because then I started all of a sudden getting a lot of followers on this. I didn't even have Instagram at the time. And then I didn't have a website. I had just joined in on this app. And then, but I had just started selling a couple recipes to some magazines, just a handful, really bad photos. Now that I look back on them, like with cell phone photos, I mean, just grainy. I see them on the website, and I just cringe. But and then, but it was they recommended. They said, hey, you should. We're making more money on these online Zoom cooking classes because everybody's trapped at home, and we're making more money than we ever did in a restaurant. You should do one for wild game. And so I did. I offered one, and then two, and then three, and they started selling out. Built a website. Got Instagram. But I mean, I had to do the website all by myself. I had to figure it out. I remember I had a GoDaddy website, and then it got too big, and I because that's the only thing I knew, right? And then it got too big, and I got too many pages, so I had to, like, leave there, and then learn, and then I had to learn it all over again. I had to learn WordPress, and then I had to build another website.
Go.
It was,
You
and I
have
just
a little HTML or what?
yeah, I was begged my wife. I was like, hey, can I hire somebody to do it? And she's like, nope. So, yeah, so it kind of just, things started happening. And then one day we were coming back from a road trip. Our daughter was sleeping in the back of the car. We had just left Bismarck, North Dakota. We were headed back to Fargo. We had a 3-hour drive ahead of us. It was late on a Sunday. And my wife said, I had just got a notice that another cooking class had sold out. And my wife said, that's really cool. She goes, I really wish there was a way we could figure out how you could do this full time. That'd be kind of neat. And then she fell asleep. Now, as a husband, you have to understand that I heard my wife say, you should quit your job and go hunting and fishing all the time
For a living.
and write recipes and hunting stories about it. And so she was asleep, and for the next 3 hours, I came up with this business plan in my head of how life was going to be. It was not that way, but I ended up, as soon as I got back to Fargo, I literally, in addition to my regular 9-to-5 job, I started driving Uber 40 hours a week for 6 months. I got up at 4 a.m. I drove nights and weekends, and I saved up because, unlike a lot of my friends who had started restaurants and breweries and businesses, and they lost everything when COVID hit, and they filed bankruptcy, they lost their in-laws' money, their investment money in these restaurants. I didn't want to do that. When I was going to start a business, I wanted to pay cash. And so I made an agreement with my wife. I said, I'm going to quit my job. I've saved. I have 6 months of salary in the bank. what I used to make. And now going forward, I will make what I used to make and enough to go on your insurance. And I will always be 60 days ahead. That way there will never be any stress. And if I ever get to that point where I'm not making it, I'll quit. And for the next year, I had to keep driving Uber because the business was hard. You know, especially freelance work.
Yeah.
People were excited. I was writing, I had articles in the paper and everything like that. And then things just dried up. And, now where I am in my life, I can do it. I am doing it full time, but it was a really tough couple of years. It really was. But
yeah, everybody loves a come up story. Here's what I'm curious to know. Like, what are you really? You're a chef, but you're also a media company, I think.
Yeah, I create content for, like Outdoor Edge Knives is a client, right? And so I will, if you go on like the Outdoor Edge Knives website, they have a Wild Game Wednesday blog. So once a month is one of my recipes. And then, so they post a new recipe every other week. And so once a month, it's my recipe. And then another month, it's another recipe of a chef, a wild game cook, might not even be a professional chef. It's just a wild game cook that I went out and recruited. And so I, edit the recipes and might touch up on the photos and things like that. But so really, and that's just helped me grow the community and get to know a lot of people because, I'm going out and doing things like that. And I've worked with the North Dakota Game and Fish Department and other departments with different things. But it's really just getting out there and making phone calls and emails and talking to people, knocking on doors. And when I first started this company, I thought I'd be hunting and fishing all the time and just writing stories about it. Right. And that's not the case. I am on my computer, with these recipes like SEO, like how is this recipe? How can I write this recipe so it shows up number 1 or number 2 on a Google search, right? Am I going to be up there with Hank Shaw or Meat Eater, the meateater.com? Am I going to show up on that? And I've worked really hard to do that. And on certain recipes, if you Google, I'm right up there. I might be number 1.
Yeah,
or,
I'm familiar with you. I've read your stuff before.
Yeah.
Which is
it's a lot of computer. It's so much time on. It's 90%. But I'm not complaining because if I start telling people this, my wife's like, "Listen, you still got to go hunting and fishing a lot."
So
right?
I'm having this conversation all the time.
Yeah.
The separation between whatever you're doing and whatever you want to do, that's your passion. The separation is a pane of glass. Like, are you willing to film yourself doing it? Are you willing to learn how to take the pictures? Are you willing to learn SEO? Like, you can put your own self on. You're just more or less four-walling your dreams. Let's talk about how you're an internet chef, really.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that. How did you bridge the gap? You came up online. You started in Zoom rooms, apparently, right?
Yeah.
Walk me through it.
Yeah. I've never been able to. I haven't. There's some videos out there that have been professionally done, like with the North Dakota Department of Agriculture, and really great videos. But that was a professional production company. When it comes to my videos and things like that, this is an amateur situation, right? I have, somebody once told me, an old boss once told me, do a few things and do those really, really well. And so you really just have to kind of concentrate on certain things. Instagram, I've really tried to work hard on, and also just my photography and recipe development, and attainable recipes. There's a lot of other chefs out there who, there's some great recipes out there by a lot of people, but for me and my audience, my niche, I believe, is having ingredients, an ingredient list where you can you're going to have them in your cupboard. Occasionally it might be something, depending on where you live, that you might have to order on Amazon, but I really try to stay away from that. You know, it's really just honing that craft of really trying to see who my audience is. And then, but it's also, you know, realizing that, especially, you know, Google, you know, I might have Google ads on my website, but you're not going to make it on that. Like there was a whole Google reset, right? Where people lost tons and tons and tons of traffic. I didn't, but I'm also, you know, I can't make a living off of that. My website traffic is, you know, it's just not up there with like Hank Shaw, right? Or the Meat Eater. It's just not. And so I have to, you have to have different revenue streams. So I do speaking engagements. So I'll go out and do a wild game cooking demonstration, and people will hire me locally, or you know, I'll do those around the country. So I'll do those. That's a big part of my business. I'll do content creation for different companies or departments. Might be a state department, something like that. Promoting getting your deer tested for chronic wasting disease. You know, you just really got to kind of see what's out there, but also stay true to who you are. You know,
Sure.
I get emails all the time like, "Hey, can you post using my spices?" You know, I just had somebody last week do that. I'm like, well, I could, but I have 3 friends who've started their own spice lines. So, I mean, I'll use theirs, and if it's good, I might post an Instagram story about it. You know, but I'm really not on that. You know, trying to send my clients.
Already.
Yeah, or to send my clients, like, or not to send my clients, but to send my viewers and my audience to somebody where they're going to spend $15 for a little shaker of spice where they could make their own following one of my recipes on the website. You know, I have to be true to who my audience is, and what they're looking for.
What about your come up chefs? Is there a digital coach play? Is that next?
I don't.
Mentorship.
Yeah, I think I just really probably don't have enough time. Um, if I had the time right now, I would really want to be a hunter ed instructor here in North Dakota. The instruction book is sitting on my shelf. That's really something that I want to do. I also have a 9-year-old daughter who I'm trying to introduce to the outdoors. And she does a lot of stuff with me, but, you know, and she wants to start going. So, you know, where do I want to put which basket do I want to put my eggs in? But it's also, I'm just now starting. I'm just writing a cookbook. You know, everybody says, when are you going to write a cookbook? And so I'm just starting that now, and that's a 2-year process. It really is. And so trying to get what I want to have in there, and making sure that it's something new, or that's relevant, and that is helpful and useful, that people are actually going to need and use. That's really my goal for it. And so,
Let's go.
yeah, that's another one. But you're never going to make it rich on a cookbook. Very rarely.
Julia Childs did pretty good with her cookbook, though.
Well, yeah, but statistically, I think it's 90% of all cookbooks published by the major publishers never sell 8,000 copies. So, and that's coming from people. I mean, you know, statistically, you're probably not going to make your money back based on how much time.
Are you going to DIY publish it?
Hoping to, yeah, I'm hoping to, because, you know, and so I'm going to need recipe testers. You know, I've got my audience, my email list, and social media people. You know, I need to make sure that these are, you know, I always test everything a couple times, but you know, when it comes down to a cookbook and it's in print forever, I'm going to need a lot of recipe testers, and I'm starting to line those up now. Yeah.
I'll test some recipes.
Yeah, no, it'd be great.
Yeah. I'm down.
Yeah,
I'll do it.
sounds good.
I'd love to.
You're listening to the Walden Podcast.
Welcome back to the Walden Podcast. Jeff, tell me this. All right. What's the wildest game that you've cooked?
I think when it comes to organs, like kidneys.
Human kidney.
No, not not a human kidney, but I think we're like deer kidneys, elk kidneys, things like that. So really using the
How adventurous are you?
liver,
If I popped
liver.
onto Wuhan and got an old Corona pangolin, would you whoop it up or no?
So yeah, I've tried pretty much as many things as I can try, but like certain things just. You got to remember, I'm always doing all these experimentations. Everything that I cook, my wife and daughter have to eat it and they have to like it before I publish it. And if they don't, then I'll do it again for some other people, and at least then what's your opinion on that? And I'll put it in the recipe. Maybe it's not their favorite, but like a red horse, like a sucker fish. I tried to prepare those inside the house. I was experimenting with them, and the smell. I almost had to. We almost had to pull our daughter out of Catholic school because I spent all her tuition money on scented candles. Um, it was so bad. It was so bad. So but a guy from U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I was doing a volunteer project with backcountry hunters and anglers, and this guy swore to me that these Canadians were coming down here to North Dakota and catching these things because they absolutely loved them and they wanted to bring them back. So I tried multiple different ways, and I just learned to have to cook certain things outside. But I'm pretty adventurous. I'll try everything. I usually will try most things once.
Yeah, your old lady and your daughter as the litmus test. She's not the kiddo.
Yeah.
A picky eater, or is she pretty adventurous herself?
No, she's pretty adventurous, actually. So, I mean, that's a good litmus test. So she's not a picky eater. So do I say it's kid friendly? Yes. Does she like things spicy? No, she doesn't. So if you're certain things, if you've ever followed like a Hank Shaw recipe, some of the peppers that he's using, it's just like, whoa, buddy. Like, yeah, we're not feeding this to a 6-year-old or a 7-year-old. So you really gotta, I really had to learn like kind of to take it down a notch on certain things. My sister-in-law is from Mexico, from Ensenada, Mexico. And, they're living down there. They spend their summers down there. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law. And so, but so there's kind of a spice level there, that, she's kind of helped me learn with certain spices and things like that, on what to use and what not when it comes to certain things. But all of my recipes on there, nothing's going to be too spicy that a kid can't handle.
Kids say the darndest things. They don't really have a filter. They just say whatever they're really thinking. I'm sure that's great to have as a chef experimenting with the recipes. Is she pretty just tell it like it is, or?
She will, yeah. Or she'll be like, yeah, it's okay, Dad. And I'll be like, listen, you got to remember, this is for people who are making this for their 8-year-old, their 9-year-old. You got to be honest with me. She's like, okay, yeah, no, it's awful. Right. So, so I can kind of tell if she's just trying to humor me. And my wife will always be brutally honest with me.
Right.
And say, no, you need to remake this and do something, make it a little different, or it needs more salt, or it needs more something. Um, so she's my biggest fan, but also my biggest critic, because she
Great.
wants to help me get it right, so people can trust when they get a recipe on the website that it's correct. You know?
Yeah, most definitely. It's great to have a team around you. Let's
Yeah.
dig a little bit deeper into the process behind creating a recipe.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've taken kind of traditional meals and thrown in different proteins or whatever with wild game. I'm curious to know what your process is. Where do you start, really?
Yeah. Really. So okay. So having a young daughter. I don't know if anybody else has gone through the program, like read 1,000 books before kindergarten. Um, and so we went to the library all the time. And so we went to the public library here in Fargo, and we would go and get books. And the older my daughter got, the more books we would walk out of the library, and she'd have 20 books. Like, it'd be a contest on how many books she could knock out in a week. And so I started going to the cookbook section and just started consuming and reading. I mean, like reading front to back, um, 3, 4 cookbooks a week. Um, I burned through every single cookbook in our one branch. We had to start going to the other branch. Um, we have 3 different libraries here in Fargo, and so I, you know, I just was learning everything. So it was, whether it was a Mexican food or Vietnamese or Indian food, and I would go through those and look at their techniques and look at their ingredients, and I just started thinking, okay, I could use this protein instead, or no, that's not going to work, or this is way too many steps and no one's going to follow through with this. Um, but if there was something that really piqued my interest, then I would take it home and show my wife, and I'd be like, "What do you think about this?" And she'd be like, "Yes." Or she might just be, I'd be going through the cookbook and she'd look over my shoulder and see this beautiful photo, and she's like, "You should make that. That looks amazing." And that's kind of how I started with the recipe development. Um, and it's gone through a transformation. Um, it used to be like, what sounded good flavor wise, what would taste really good. But now, from a business perspective, it's really interesting on all the different things that you have to take into account. So now it's not only, is it going to taste good, but it's also, is this something that my audience is gonna want to cook
Marketing.
and
Right.
can cook, but also, is it attainable for them, right? Just
Yeah.
for the everyday person, is this attainable for a busy weeknight, or do you need a Sunday afternoon or
Yeah.
an all day Saturday? Is this a 30-minute meal? Okay, but then also, then you have to take into perspective: is this going to look good on the camera? Because there's a lot of really delicious food out there that does not look good when a picture is taken. I have tossed dozens and dozens of recipes that will never make it on the website or in a cookbook, because they just don't photograph well. They taste delicious. Um, and then you also have to look at, when it comes to the website, how is this going to show up? Is this going to show up? Do I even have a chance for it to show up
Not
on?
the prettiest pictured meal. It
Right.
probably good, right? But
Yeah.
you got to
Yeah.
think about that. Is the thumbnail going to hit? All of
Right.
these things, really.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
Yeah. But then it's also too on the, knowing SEO, and when I do a recipe, is there a chance at some point in the future, it may take 6 months, it may take a year, but is it attainable for me to have this recipe show up in a Google search or in an internet search and land on page 1 in the top 5? That's always my goal. And so I'm writing recipes that, is this a photo that people are going to want to click on,
Yeah.
or does it have a name that's going to, the way a recipe is titled, is,
You're looking who what is the least talked about and cooked game, really?
Right. Yeah.
Are you doing the Chuck-fil-A sandwich or whatever with Chuck?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
obscure upland birds, I'm sure.
Yeah. And there's some kind of interesting ones. Like my pheasant Florentine. I think if you Google pheasant recipes, my pheasant Florentine is like number 5 or 6. I mean,
Go.
so it's up there. Um, but like venison spaghetti, like I think I'm number 1. Like if you were to
Let's
Google
go.
venison spaghetti, right? Goose pastrami.
To do venison
Yeah.
spaghetti?
What's that?
Are you the first person to do venison spaghetti?
No, not at all. But the way I wrote it, the way I wrote it on the website, just knowing how to write it specifically for SEO. There's lots of people who've done venison spaghetti. It's not that hard. It's spaghetti,
Right.
but with ground venison. It's
Right.
not an original idea, right? People use that all the time. But then things like pheasant pot pie, or pickled northern. I think I'm right up there too. Like if you were to Google pickled northern pike or pickled northern, I'm right up there. And people are, what really helps, what's really the secret, is what's really interesting is there might be recipes out there that were written forever ago, or they've been in a magazine or something like that. But if people take the time when they go on my website and they try one of the recipes and then they give it a 5-star review or even a 4-star review. But if they actually take the time to click on that button and review it, that helps. I made a homemade deer bacon, right? Where, there's all kinds of recipes out there for deer bacon, but it makes like 20 pounds of it. And so I created a recipe for deer bacon, venison bacon. It's ground venison and some ground pork, and mix it with cure. And it fits in a 9x13 pan in your fridge and overnight. And then you slap that brick of meat onto your smoker, and then you slice it into what looks like bacon. That has got like 66, almost all 5-star reviews, and that many people have gone out and tried it and reviewed it, and actually took the time to leave a review.
Let's go.
And that's what helps. Yeah, I mean, that's
definitely people out.
That's what helps show up
when you try the recipe.
Yeah.
Take pictures, leave your review.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. So people actually responding and taking the time to actually tell me what they thought of it and let other people out there. Yeah.
What does it mean to you when they do take the time to leave a review?
It's crazy. I just looked at statistics. When I get messages, so when somebody leaves a comment or something, and then I'll, I absolutely loved it, or I think it was somebody like they bought a Jacquard meat tenderizer, right? This is this little tool that that somebody introduced me to. It was actually that Danielle from the DVQ, the one that does the Traeger grills. She was like, Jeff, you got to get this Jacquard. I use it. And so I started tenderizing all the steaks, all the venison steaks with it. I'll even use it on goose breasts. And when I had a venison steak that somebody gave me out of their freezer, and I hit it with the Jacquard, and then I just literally seasoned it with salt and pepper and olive oil, and I cooked it to medium rare, and then let it rest. And then I sliced it thin, and they tried it. They were like, "Oh, what is this? This is amazing." And we've been eating it. We've been overcooking it for 30 years, and now we love venison steaks again, right? Like now we love deer steak. Or when somebody says that online, or they'll come up to me at an event and they'll be like, "That literally has been a game changer in my life of just getting this little tool." And their wife is eating deer steak now, or their kids are eating deer steak, or they prepared a meal for their husband and they just absolutely love it. So that's just huge to me. And last week, like I looked like over 100 people printed one of my recipes last week. I think I looked at the statistics. I'm like, that's just like that's cool, right? They actually clicked on the print recipe button and printed a recipe and had it in their kitchen and were working with it just last week.
It's awesome.
That just, yeah, it just, the fact that people are using the recipes and getting a lot out of it and feeding their family with it, that's my goal.
Let's talk about cooking, setting the table, sitting down as a family unit. I mean, that's what people can get from your recipes. Do you guys sit down at home and eat at the dinner table, or
Every meal. Yeah.
less? I think.
Yeah, we've really made it a priority. Our daughter, we just sat down right before we recorded this podcast and we had a little family meeting because our daughter wanted to do dance and gymnastics. And we said, you can pick one thing at a time, right? Because we're not going to drive around. We have friends that do that. God bless them. God bless all of you listening who do that. You're a soccer parent or a hockey parent, or traveling teams. Good heavens. But we're just, pick one thing and concentrate on that. She can do piano, and then she wants to take piano lessons, and she's in a little organization like a scouting group too. But then you're going to pick one other thing because we're not going to drive around every night, and we're just going to shuttle you around. And I'm gone for months at a time in the fall. I mean, like I'll come home for 24 hours or 48 hours. And I want to be with them. Right. And then that way, the rest of the year too, then I can kind of pick and choose my events and things and have family time. But I just don't want that to be our life. And we've just found a really good balance where we can sit down and have meals together. My wife might run out the door in the morning, but my daughter and I sit and have breakfast in the morning. If I'm here in town, we're having breakfast. My wife works really close, so she'll come home for lunch and try new recipes. And that's a great blessing. So, and then we're always eating together for supper.
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, you're encouraging people to get in the kitchen, get back to cooking, getting away from the fast food, getting families to sit down together as a unit and enjoy a meal. I mean, what kind of pushing are you doing for the family unit?
I just encouraging, I think just giving them recipes. I'm not going to tell anybody what to do, but and how to parent at all. But I think just giving them recipes, that they can easily do and accomplish, like put it in a crock pot in the morning. And that way it's done and not mush by the time you get home. Or maybe it's an maybe it's a pressure cooker Instapot kind of situation, or maybe it's just something that you can whip up, quick 30 minutes on a weeknight before, because you had to take them to dance class or because you had to take them to whatever activity it was, and just letting them do that. But it's also too, I have to remember, and really to be realistic, that the timing of food, that now that I can do this full time, before when I was working a regular 9 to 5 job and then coming home and cooking these and recipe testing, they ate a lot of cold food. My wife and daughter ate a lot of miserably cold food because dad was sitting there taking photos. In, with lights, big lights. And now I use all natural light. I'm cooking I might be cooking like between 4 and 5 p.m. so I can have it on the table and then do photos so that as soon as my wife walks in the door, it's on the table, ready to eat.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Let's go. How does that make you feel? Escaping from the 9 to 5 100% and being able to have it on the table at 5, ready to go.
Yeah. It feels really good to be able to have, this time with have the time with being able to make breakfast for my daughter. People have to understand. I'm up at 4:35 in the morning, already on the laptop, already on the computer, getting a post ready or editing or something like that. Um, and then, but there was a lot of late nights, and so I try not to do that. So I'm up very early while the girls are sleeping, and I'll get at least 2 hours to 3 hours of work done before they even wake up. But that way, turn the computer off and I'm being attentive to them. And then I might get my daughter off to school, and then I'm working. You know, so I'm going to sit down and have breakfast with her, and cell phones are off, and then if she tries to grab my phone and look at my phone, you know, she's like, um, when she looks at social media, she might try to look at something like, no, we're not going to do that. And she's like, well, you're on social media. I'm like, for work, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Trust,
um, yeah,
it's not exact. It's work. You know,
yeah.
let's talk about the socials. Are you How far ahead are you? Are you months ahead right now? Are you a year ahead in content and recipes, or
No, no. I just broke out the count. So tonight's, um, I just did a fried bluegill. We caught a bunch of bluegill on. My wife and I got to escape. Our daughter was at summer camp, and so her first overnight summer camp that she got to go to for 4 nights, and so we um, were just nearby at another lake camping and fishing, and went out on the kayak and did a bunch of hiking, and we caught a limit of bluegill.
let's
And so
go?
I scaled them and gutted them, and I fried up half of them tonight, like whole. And so, but I did a photo shoot with it, and that will be probably published. Um, I've got another. I kept the other half so we can just kind of make sure and do it again, and because we're having friends over, so I'm going to feed it to them with their little kids, and make sure that everybody likes it, and we get a kind of a second review, and then that will be because it's just kind of that season for bluegills up here, and sweet corn and watermelon is in the photo. That will probably be published on Tuesday. So I kind of was reworking the recipes. You know, I'm trying to get ahead on that stuff, but it's also finding a balance of what am I publishing on the website, and then also now that I'm writing a cookbook, what am I going to save just for
Yeah.
that cookbook for those cookbook readers? So
So
yeah,
let's talk about sourcing game for this. Do you have a freezer
yeah.
full of everything under the sun? Are you taking donations from hunters and fishers?
I'll never turn down wild game. Yeah. So I generally okay. So when it comes to geese, that'll be the first here in a couple weeks. Uh, we'll fill up with a lot of geese and ducks, and then I don't have a dog anymore, so I'm really jealous of you and all this upland bird hunting. And so I lost my dog a few years ago, and so I really had to switch to um, how I waterfowl hunt. And you know, when people are like, "Oh yeah, I've got a dog," and then we'll go out and it's not a good situation. This is not a trained dog, right? So I'm really I'm just
Gotta
like,
start
okay,
somewhere.
yeah, but so we have a lot of upland birds here in North Dakota, but timing wise, um, being able to go out and be successful because there is a dog there that can find down birds. I just um, I've been gifted any pheasant recipes that you see on the website. That's been stuff that was gifted. We had like one good hunt this last year, and that was it. Sharpies. I've got a couple of really good spots out in the Badlands, and so
Hey, I'm YouTubing. We should.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah, yeah.
indubitably be in the Dakotas for pheasant season. I'd love to do a collaboration, and
No, hey, if you want to come out,
my dog.
yeah.
So
No, I've seen, yeah,
um,
yeah. I've seen your dog in action on there, and so um, yeah, I would love to be able to I'll go hunting with anybody anytime. And so, especially being able to stay close, we've got great bird hunting an hour out of Fargo. Sorry, people are listening. So, it's like 5 hours out of Fargo. I better say that. That way they don't know my spot. But no, I mean, we really do. You don't have to travel very far. And
I'd love
so,
to do a collab. Let's
yeah.
go shoot some pheasant and then teach me how to do the pheasant Florentine.
Yeah, we can do something with the legs and the thighs. We can do something with the breasts, the tenders. I can show,
I'd love
yeah,
to.
yeah. No, that would be great. We can definitely put something on the schedule.
I'm curious to know what is the most sleeper wild game? Like, what's the one nobody ever cooks that you're like, this one's flame, this is fire.
Probably just, um, I my goose pastrami I think is really popular just because everybody just makes it into jerky, and there's so much to the Canada goose. It's just people just don't. They're like, it's on, it's on a, it's just crapping on your golf course, or there's just people are just like, we don't want to eat it, or they've just had a bad experience with it. And really, I've done stuff with the hearts, with the gizzards, um, and using the legs and thighs. I mean, that's a lot of meat, especially on an adult Canada goose. You can just braise those legs and thighs down and just use it for anything. Like I told you, like we've done Indian food, Mexican food, um, stews. I mean, soups. It's one of those things it's a really good meat. Um, there's a lot of it on there, and so I think just really utilizing that. I think it's just that probably the Canada goose is probably one of the most underappreciated, or even snow geese. Really, I mean, just using the legs and thighs. I did a spring goose hunt in Missouri this last year. I got all of the legs and thighs. Everyone's just like, "You take them, buddy." And we've had a ton of meat, and I've been able to do a ton of recipes off those.
So let's talk about goose prep then.
Yeah.
Are you dry aging these things too, or?
I mean, you don't want to freeze it right away. So if I can, when I say hang birds, I'm not like hanging them. I might hang them, but we're processing them, and and then when I get them home, I'll have kind of everything separated, whether it's the hearts and the gizzards and the legs and the thighs and the breast meat. And then when it comes to really the legs and the thighs, because you're going to braise everything. Same with the front shoulder of a deer. You're not really going to age it. I mean, even after 48 hours, you would be good then to be able to freeze that because you're going to braise it. But when it comes to like things that you could cook like to steak, like when you're talking about that duck, like Gordon Ramsay at the beginning, cooking the perfect duck, um, and making sure that you're doing goose or duck and you're treating it like beef and you're cooking it to medium rare. It when it comes to the breast meat, right? Um, and so yeah, you might want to age it. Uh, Hit it with a Jacquard meat tenderizer. That makes a huge difference. Cook it to medium rare, slice it thin. It's just going to be completely different experience. Yeah.
Let's go. I'm curious to know, like you're gonna go for the opener in goose season, I'm guessing.
Oh yeah, I was making all my phone calls for my permissions today, and then we're going to drive around. My daughter and I will go and jump in the vehicle and drive around, and we'll scout who planted wheat now, right? Because they're going to start taking wheat off here in a couple weeks, as early as 10 days. So we'll drive around, see who planted wheat, where those wheat fields are, and then we'll go get permissions, try to get permissions. And it helps to have a cute 9-year-old redhead.
To ask
Yeah, to go up and be like, "Hey, my dad and I want to hunt this," right? And she'll be out in the blind with me. She gets her own layout blind this year, so she's not shooting yet, but she'll be out there with me on a few different hunts. And so before school starts, and so yeah, that always helps too. And but also too that I help farm. I help my in-laws farm. They're farmers, so we do soybeans and corn. So having that connection too with landowners, saying, I'm going to be really busy between hunting, myself, following clients around, because I'll do hunting photography. I'll follow clients around. They'll hire me as their camp cook, their photographer, their butcher, and farming. I mean, my falls are nuts. And so if I can go to a landowner and say, hey, I'm not after pheasants, I'm not after deer, I'm not even after ducks. I want to shoot these geese that are eating up your soybeans in the spring and destroying your fields. Could I come do that? And they're like, yes. And I want to hit early season because I farm too. Yes. Then that helps a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go. Teach the kid, hey, mister, at an early age. That is the cheat code, really.
And to get out there and ask permissions now before, going up to somebody who's trying to take corn off their field or beans off their field and sitting at the approach and try to wait for a guy to get out of his combine so you can ask for permission. It's not really good timing, right? We're working 16-hour days trying to get that crop off. And so going up and asking now and taking the time to ask him permission, or maybe you don't, and then writing a letter. Writing letters and asking permission and explaining your situation in advance, that's a big help too. Yeah.
So how many new recipes can we expect from you this year?
I do one new recipe every Tuesday morning.
One a week.
It's guaranteed. I'm just, I just, there's so many ideas. I have notebooks and notebooks and notebooks of ideas, but really trying to find the balance of being able to have the time to create recipes for clients and their websites or the magazines, and being able to deliver to my audience every Tuesday morning, and being able to make enough we're talking probably 100 recipes for the cookbook, whether it's, and that's upland birds, that's waterfowl, that's fish, that's big game. It's a lot, but I mean, we're eating wild game. 90% of our meals are wild game. And so I need about 6 deer / antelope sized. Every year I need about 6 deer just to feed and that's a small family of 3 of us. Right. But for as much as I'm doing in the recipes that I'm developing, I need about that many, about 6 deer a year. And that's just deer. That's not waterfowl. That's not upland birds and fish. So,
and you're hunting them, I'm guessing.
Yeah. The vast majority, like I said, like upland birds, I just didn't have a good year for pheasants. And so, yeah, sometimes I'll get gifted things, but the vast majority are things that I've caught and I've hunted. And, but it's also then creating the content along with that, taking pictures on the hunt or on the fishing trip. And so people can experience those things. And I always push North Dakota. That's also a big part of my platform. If you go down to the end of every recipe, you'll see at the end of a big game recipe, if you want to come hunting in North Dakota, or a fish recipe or a bird recipe, if you want to come hunting in North Dakota, here's a link to the Game and Fish Department website. Now, some North Dakotans are saying, don't encourage anybody else. Like, stop sending these people to North Dakota, right? We have there's too much competition, but there is plenty of public land out there. And anybody listening, I really want to encourage you. We have 1 million acres of the Little Missouri National Grasslands out by Medora, and where Theodore Roosevelt fell in love with North Dakota. And that's a lot of public land where you can just pull off to the side of the road and camp for free. And you can hunt and you can hike and bird hunt. Huge, phenomenal bird hunting out in the Little Missouri National Grasslands. And it's a beautiful area. So anybody listening, if you want to come to North Dakota and do that, maybe you need some help in pointing you in the right direction. I'm not going to give you a spot, but I'll be I'll be more than happy to point you in a direction of
think
where
the
you might be able to find some birds.
something about maybe giving away his waypoints for the grasslands.
What's that?
Brown, the bearded uplander. We'll call Tim Brown. I think
Yeah.
about coughing up the waypoints for the grasslands.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't do that, but I'm willing to point, like here's where you might want to stay and you could head north or west, or here's a town, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Jeff, we're just about out of time here, sir. I really appreciate you coming on. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I'm where I'd love to get is to have a resident expert in certain fields. Have you come back on, do another one if you'd be open to it.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I'm honest to God, I would absolutely love it if you'd come to North Dakota and let's do a bird hunt together.
Let's
I'd
do it. I'm going to. I'm going to definitely be there. I'm running around the
Yeah.
whole country this year. We're going to hit everywhere.
That's great. No,
So
I would love
I'd
to.
love to
I would love to meet you out someplace.
I'm going to push all the totally upland stuff to YouTube this year too. So
That's great.
a teamwork throwdown in the kitchen would be awesome. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Well, it's great to meet you, sir. Let's keep in touch and let's make the North Dakota thing happen. I'm down.
Yeah, sounds good. And if anybody does need recipes, if you want to go to wildgameandfish.com, or you can follow me on Instagram, is probably the best place to find me at, and that's at wildgameandfish.
Wildgameandfish.com.